First light breaks over the Madison River. The water moves clear and cold, carrying snowmelt from mountains that pierce 11,000 feet into the Montana sky. Beneath the surface, in the shadow of a sunken log, a cutthroat trout holds against the current, 14 inches of muscle shaped by millennia in these high-elevation waters. The scarlet slash beneath its jaw marks it as native to this place, to this altitude, to these exact conditions of cold and clarity that define the Rocky Mountain West. The Rocky Mountains. Stretching from northern New Mexico through Montana and into Canada, this continental spine holds some of the coldest, clearest waters in North America. Here, where elevation meets latitude, where snowpack feeds countless rivers and alpine lakes, thrives a collection of trout species that has defined American fly fishing for over a century. These are not uniform waters. The Madison River begins at the confluence of the Firehole and Gibbon Rivers in Yellowstone National Park, then flows north for 183 miles before meeting the Gallatin and Jefferson to form the Missouri. The Yellowstone River, the longest free-flowing river in the lower 48, drains the eastern slopes of the park. The Colorado River begins as snow melt in the Never Summer Mountains, trickling from alpine lakes before carving its way south and west. Each of these watersheds, and hundreds more like them, holds trout populations adapted to specific conditions of temperature, elevation, and flow. The fish that inhabit these waters fall into two categories, though the line between them has blurred considerably over the past 140 years. Native species, cutthroat trout in their various subspecies, along with mountain whitefish and the nearly extinct Arctic grayling, evolved here over millions of years, their genetics shaped by isolation in separate drainages. Introduced species: rainbow trout from the Pacific coast, brown trout from Europe, brook trout from eastern North America, arrived through human intervention beginning in the late 1800s, forever altering the composition of these fisheries. Hello my friends, welcome to American Fishing Atlas. Subscribe to the channel, share and like. Thank you. The story of Rocky Mountain trout is inseparable from the story of the American West itself. When the Lewis and Clark expedition passed the headwaters of the Missouri in 1805, the Madison River teemed with native West Slope cutthroat trout and Arctic grayling. By the time Yellowstone became the world's first national park in 1872, these waters had already drawn the attention of early anglers who recognized something extraordinary in the clarity of the streams and the abundance of the fish. The Washburn Party of 1870, instrumental in establishing the park 2 years later, found an untrammeled angler's paradise. It was at Madison Junction, where the Gibbon and Firehole come together, that expedition members first conceived the idea of preserving this landscape for all time. They succeeded. But what they couldn't have known was how dramatically the fish populations themselves would change in the century that followed. To understand trout in the Rockies requires understanding both what was and what is. The native cutthroat trout, Oncorhynchus virginalis in its Rocky Mountain form, displays the distinctive red-orange slash marks beneath the jaw that gave the species its common name. These fish exhibit tremendous variation: the Yellowstone cutthroat, the greenback cutthroat, the Colorado River cutthroat, the Rio Grande cutthroat. Each subspecies evolved in isolation, adapted to specific watersheds, differing in coloration from yellowish-brown to brilliant orange-red and golden. Historically, Rocky Mountain cutthroat trout occupied much of the Yellowstone River basin, portions of the Snake River drainage, and the headwaters of the Colorado and Rio Grande. They spawned in clear, cold, moderately deep lakes and the well-oxygenated rivers that fed them. Spring spawning begins when water temperatures reach 43 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit, late in the season at these elevations, sometimes not until June or July in high mountain lakes. The greenback cutthroat trout, native to the eastern slopes of the Rockies in Colorado, was once so abundant it helped sustain early settlers. By the mid-20th century, the greenback was considered extinct. Then, in the early 1960s, a small population was discovered in a tributary of the South Platte. Today, thanks to intensive conservation efforts, the greenback exists in 52 locations with 19 stable populations. A recovery story, though the species occupies only a fraction of its original range. Then came the introductions. Rainbow trout, Oncorhynchus micus, native to Pacific coast drainages, arrived in the Rockies in the 1880s. Named for the pink-red stripe that runs along their sides, rainbows prefer faster water than browns, including riffles and heavy pocket water. They spawn in spring, much like cutthroat, and the two species readily hybridize, producing fertile cub bows that carry genetic material from both parents. Brown trout came next. Salmotruta, native to Europe and Western Asia, was introduced to Colorado waters in 1890. Brown spawn in fall, October through December, making them temporarily separated from the spring-spawning natives. They tolerate warmer water than most other trout species, can grow to impressive sizes, and develop different eating habits as they mature. Beyond 12 inches, browns increasingly feed on larger prey, crayfish, smaller fish, even mice. Brook trout, actually a char, Salvelinus fontinalis, arrived from the eastern United States in 1872. Known for their dark green coloration with red-orange spots, brookies are fall spawners that breed abundantly and can outcompete other species in headwater streams. They depend on cold, well-oxygenated water of high purity, making them well-suited to alpine lakes and high-elevation tributaries. Lake trout, also a char, and mountain whitefish round out the major species. The mountain whitefish, native to these drainages, remains common though often overlooked by anglers focused on trout. These fish, silvery and streamlined, share the same cold, clean waters and feed primarily on aquatic insects and small crustaceans. The rivers themselves shape these fish populations in profound ways. The Madison River, key to understanding Rocky Mountain trout ecology, begins in Yellowstone, where the thermally fed Firehole and Gibbon merge. These geothermal tributaries, heated by the same volcanic activity that powers Old Faithful, deliver mineral-rich water that jumpstarts aquatic productivity. The result: some of the most prolific insect hatches in North America, supporting exceptional trout populations. When Hebgen Dam was completed in 1915, it created tailwater effects in the famous 50-mile riffle. Downstream, the stretch from Quake Lake to Innes Lake. The dam stabilized flows and water temperatures, creating ideal trout habitat. Today, the Madison hosts healthy populations of brown trout, rainbow trout, and whitefish, with cutthroat rare outside Yellowstone National Park boundaries. The transformation of Rocky Mountain waters into legendary fishing destinations didn't happen by accident. It followed a pattern familiar across the American West: discovery, exploitation, then gradual appreciation for what was being lost. When Yellowstone National Park opened to automobiles in 1915, annual visitation exploded from 15,000 to 80,000. Many of these travelers packed fishing gear. The park's waters, initially managed with little understanding of ecology, became testing grounds for fish stocking programs that introduced species from around the world. Beginning in 1889, both native and non-native fish were planted throughout park waters. Rainbow trout from California, brown trout from Germany, brook trout from Michigan, all found their way into Yellowstone's rivers and lakes. Most of Yellowstone's lakes and streams above major waterfalls originally held no game fish. Native cutthroat could not navigate the falls to reach these waters naturally. Government stocking operations changed this, introducing mainly non-native species. A report from the early 1900s noted with optimism, "Trout have been planted in nearly all streams in the park. The experiment has been so successful that there are now but few places in this country where better sport can be had by the fishermen." The unintended consequences of these introductions would take decades to fully manifest. Meanwhile, small towns near the best fishing waters began to transform. West Yellowstone, Montana, at the park's western entrance, and Ennis, downstream on the Madison, evolved into what are now considered two of fly fishing's most iconic destinations. Don Martinez established the first dedicated fly shop in West Yellowstone in 1935. 3 years later, Dan Bailey opened his famous fly shop and guide service in Livingston, Montana. These businesses served a growing community of anglers who saw in these mountain waters something worth protecting. The tradition of fly fishing in the Rockies owes much to the waters themselves. The clear, cold streams demanded technical skill. Fish could see clearly in these transparent flows, making them selective about what they would eat. This selectivity, combined with abundant insect hatches, created ideal conditions for fly fishing, the art of presenting an artificial fly that mimics the natural insects trout feed upon. Edward Hewitt, a noted fly angling writer, described a 1914 trip to the Upper Madison during which he and a companion caught a combined 327 trout in a single day. Such abundance seems impossible now, but it speaks to the extraordinary productivity of these waters before population pressures mounted. One event stands out in the Madison's geological and angling history. Just before midnight on August 17, 1959, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck. Millions of tons of rock roared down the mountainside of Madison Canyon, damming the river and killing 28 people in a Forest Service campground. The fallen debris created what is now called Quake Lake. Upstream, enormous waves sloshed violently over Hebgen Dam, cracking but not destroying it. The stretch immediately below Quake Lake, known as the Slide, became a testing ground for whitewater kayakers, but calm pockets among the rapids held fish. This dramatic reshaping of the river became part of its character, part of its story. Anglers adapted, learning to fish the new waters the earthquake had created. As the 20th century progressed, fly fishing in the Rockies experienced boom and bust cycles. The Madison, like many western rivers, was devastated by whirling disease in the 1990s. Myxobola cerebralis, a parasitic infection fatal to juvenile trout, arrived from Europe and spread throughout the West. Rainbow and cutthroat trout proved especially susceptible. On the Madison, trout populations crashed to a third of pre-disease levels. Yet the river recovered. Whether through natural selection favoring resistant fish or changes in environmental conditions, populations rebounded. By the early 2000s, the Madison once again supported exceptional trout numbers. This resilience offered hope that these fish populations, though altered from their native state, possess the adaptability to persist. Fishing the high country of the Rockies means fishing water that changes character with elevation and season. In the headwater streams of Rocky Mountain National Park, at 9 or 10,000 feet, small brook and cutthroat trout hold in pocket water behind boulders, in the shade of undercut banks. The water here runs cold even in July, 50 degrees or less, slowed by beaver dams, and pooling in meadows where elk graze at dawn. The fishing is delicate. Brookies, rarely exceeding 12 inches at these elevations, rise eagerly to dry flies, but spook easily in the clear, shallow water. Anglers wade carefully, keeping low profiles, presenting size 14 or 16 elk hair caddis or parachute atoms to fish visible from 20 feet away. Each catch becomes a study in the fish's adaptation to altitude, compact bodies, vibrant colors intensified by the thin air and intense sunlight. Lower, where major rivers take shape, the character shifts dramatically. The Madison between Hebgen and Quake Lakes flows as a relatively small, meandering stream with numerous oxbows. U.S. Highway 191 follows the river, gravel roads leading to access points. Boats are prohibited, leaving these waters to wade anglers. The river can warm considerably in midsummer due to thermal inputs from Yellowstone's geysers upstream, but in fall, when water temperatures drop and fish move up from Hebgen Lake preparing to spawn, the fishing becomes exceptional. Below Quake Lake, the famous 50-mile riffle begins. Here the Madison displays its full character, swift but manageable current, rocks and riffles interspersed with slicks, perfect habitat for browns and rainbows averaging 12 to 16 inches, with occasional fish exceeding 20. The salmon fly hatch of late June and early July draws anglers from across the nation. These massive stoneflies, nearly 3 inches long, emerge en masse, prompting explosive surface feeding. When salmon flies hatch, anglers line the banks shoulder to shoulder at popular runs, like the Barnes Pools and Cable Car Run. Local etiquette dictates fishing these runs from top to bottom, allowing others to work in behind. It's communal fishing, unlike the solitude of high country streams, but the potential for large trout on big dry flies justifies the crowds. Fall brings different opportunities. As September arrives and water cools, resident fish become active again, while migratory trout from Hebgen Lake push into the river. The number of large fish increases through October. Anglers target these migrants by nymphing, drifting weighted flies near the bottom, or swinging streamers. The streamers of choice often borrow from steelhead fishing, long, articulated patterns in dark colors, cast across current and allowed to swing through deep runs. In Yellowstone National Park itself, fishing carries additional considerations. All native species, cutthroat trout, grayling, and whitefish, must be immediately released unharmed. Non-natives like rainbow, brown, and brook trout have varying bag limits. In Yellowstone Lake, all lake trout caught must be killed, an effort to protect the native Yellowstone cutthroat from this invasive predator introduced decades ago. The park's Madison, Firehole, and Gibbon rivers offer a different experience than their Montana downstream sections. Within park boundaries, the Madison resembles a spring creek more than a freestone river. Aquatic grasses wave in current over sand or small pebble bottoms. Elk and bison frequent the grassy banks. The river holds both resident trout and migrants from Hebgen Lake. The Barnes Pools, just above the park boundary, rank among Yellowstone's most famous fishing holes, deep runs that hold numbers of large fish, fished by generations of anglers using identical methods. Higher still, alpine lakes scattered throughout the Rockies offer unique challenges. Many were fishless until stocking programs introduced various trout species. Some hold populations of Yellowstone cutthroat. Others contain more exotic denizens, golden trout transplanted from California's Sierra Nevada, or the few remaining lakes with Arctic grayling. Reaching these lakes requires hiking, sometimes miles into wilderness, often above 11,000 feet where thin air makes exertion difficult. The reward: fish that have seen few artificial flies, rising eagerly to attractors, sometimes growing surprisingly large on the abundant insect life these fertile lakes support. Fishing these waters means carrying minimal gear, using light rods, presenting simple patterns. It means experiencing trout in settings approaching what existed before European settlement, though even here, the fish themselves are often introductions. Climate change, invasive species, disease, and habitat fragmentation now converge across the Rocky Mountains, reshaping trout populations in measurable ways. Bull trout and native cutthroat have already declined, pressured by warming stream temperatures, reduced summer flows, and expanding non-native competitors. In many drainages, cutthroat occupy only a fraction of their historic range, while browns, rainbows, and brook trout alter food webs and hybridize with native fish. Yet conservation science has grown more precise. Targeted removal of invasive species, construction of protective barriers, habitat restoration, and genetic preservation efforts, like those in Hermosa Creek, demonstrate that native trout can recover when given cold, connected water and relief from competition. Hope lies in resilience and stewardship. Rivers such as the Madison have rebounded from whirling disease, greenback cutthroat populations have expanded from near extinction, and coordinated lake trout removal efforts in Yellowstone show that long-term commitment can shift ecological balance. The future of Rocky Mountain trout will require managing multiple stressors at once, protecting thermal refuges, restoring watershed health, and recognizing that anglers themselves are now central to conservation. These waters, shaped by geology, altered by history, and challenged by climate, still carry wild trout through their currents. Whether native or introduced, their survival will depend on continued responsibility, ensuring that cold mountain rivers remain living systems rather than memories.